Hey everybody, Dan Holstein here. I've got a question for you. As the CEO of a growing enterprise, do you ever find that there's not enough time in the day to get to all of your critical, most important activities? Yeah, you've been there? Okay, so what happens here? We've got all kinds of stuff on the go that's important that we want to execute on, but we're giving in to the day-to-day distractions, the busyness, and the firefighting. And then when that happens, we haven't got time for just sitting to think and be strategic and plan to develop our relationships with our key team members and important clients and strategic vendors. No time for days off and easy, lunch times and things like that. We're just go, go, go. So how do we end up in a situation where we're just really, really busy? Now, we're intelligent individuals. We're running an enterprise. We're the CEO or the owner. We've got a lot of skill and ability, but we can still find ourselves really, really busy. So very often what's happening is we're getting confused between what's important and what's urgent, or we're forgetting about our important objectives because we're giving into the constant urgency demands. Now, if you've read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, you know what I'm referring to. Stephen talks about the concept of urgency versus importance, and that the things that are the most important for us to do often have very little urgency about them. And so we can delay and procrastinate and give in to the day-to-day demands and leave our important things for later. However, what happens is, as we leave our important items for later, they become more urgent. And eventually they become urgent and important. In other words, they become a problem. So we want to make sure that we're giving due time for the things that are important. So how do we start this? How do we get time back out of our day when we're already so busy and maybe even overcommitted? Well, it comes down to making some key decisions that you may not be making. So here's what I mean. Sometimes there's decisions that we make. If we were to make the decision, it would preclude other activities from having to happen or many other decisions from needing to be made. So here's an example. Let's say, for instance, when you started your company, you hired somebody on in an executive or leadership role, and they were an A player. And as the business has grown and evolved, they have no longer grown and evolved with the business. The business has kind of eclipsed them, and the skill and ability that they need to execute at the A player level is just no longer there. Now, let's say also this person, they've been there for a while, maybe one of your first employees or key hires. They're a great person. They're supportive of the team. They're positive. They're great to be around. They're a wonderful team member, but they're just not cutting it when it comes to performance. What might that mean for you? Well, it could mean they're slowing the rest of the team down. It could be they're dragging the team down and slowing down performance and execution, and we're not hitting objectives. It could be they're not hitting their own targets. It could be they require more support from you in terms of hand-holding and training and coaching to get where they need to be, but they're just not progressing, but they're using up your time. It could be that you need to delegate, or other people need to delegate to this individual, but they're not, because there's a bit of fear that they're not going to execute well. In other words, they're taking up your time one way or another. So what's the decision that needs to be made? Well, the decision that needs to be made is they need to be out of this role. That sounds very logical. We'll just move them on to another role in the company if there's a fit, or we may need to release them to pursue success at another company. Now, that sounds very logical, and it's easy enough to make that decision. However, we have a bit of a stuck point here. We haven't made the decision. So why is that? We've got to look at the two components of a decision. There's the logical and the emotional. And the logical is what to do, and the emotional is what's going to happen when. So let's say for this person, we're going to move them on, but they've been a key staff member for a long time. You have a good personal relationship. There could be some fear in injuring that relationship, fear of what's going to happen to this person if you move them on. In other words, we can have an emotional stuck point that keeps us from making the decision and keeping us staying too busy. Let me give you another example. Say, for instance, you've got a key client, and this client was in your previous target market that you used to serve, but you've really shifted your business to serve a new target market, but you still got this past client, right? They're still there, and your team has to execute on the new way of doing business with the new target market and make exceptions for handling this other client. But you love them, they're great. They're probably not as profitable as you'd like to be, and they're chewing up your team's time. They're coming to you with challenges. It's wasting some of your time. What to do? Right, we want to move them on, but that's the logic again. We need to look at the emotional. Why aren't we pulling the trigger and letting them go and letting somebody else serve them? Well, maybe they've been around for a long time. They've really been a great proponent and referral source for your business. They've been a fantastic supporter. They've been a great revenue source. They've just been a fantastic client all around, but they're just no longer in your target market. So we could fear injuring the relationship with them, getting our reputation in the market tarnished by letting them go. In other words, there's this emotional component, could be fear-based, while we're not making the decision to move the client on and get back all that time, reduce all that complexity, and be able to have our team execute well on our existing new processes. So as you can see, it's often there's decisions that need to be made that we don't make them, and it keeps us busy. The key thing here is to identify what are some of the things in your business that are keeping you busy, and what is the decision behind that you've not yet made that you need to make in order to get some of your time back. Part two of that is what are some of the emotional components to that decision that you're maybe not quite ready to deal with and that you're going to need to deal with. The other aspect of this is if you have some fear around making that decision, if there's unknowns, what do you need to learn so that you know what the outcome is going to be and how to handle it moving forward? In other words, guys, we've got to be able to identify what's holding us back, be able to understand the decision we need to make to get our time back, work through the emotional component of that decision, maybe push through a little bit of fear, pull the trigger, and just see what's going to happen next. So that's it for this time. I wish you happy deciding and fantastic outcomes and getting your time back. All the best.